Today I'm going to talk about why it's important to talk about the downsides of atheism. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. I wanted to address why it is that I do talk about the downsides of atheism and why people should talk about the downsides of atheism. And because of course there's a thing, it's good to stay positive. You attract far more flies with a spoonful of honey than with a barrel of vinegar. Small asterisk. It depends on the kinds of flies, because some kinds of vinegar smell like fruit and really attract fruit flies extremely well. But anyway, particular flies aside, being positive. There's a lot of negativity in the world. Who needs more negativity? Negativity doesn't really win people over, and being positive does. Being joy, spreading the joy of the truth does bring people to it. But talking about the dark side, dark sides of error and so on, doesn't. Well, there are limits to that. The foremost reason why it's important to talk about the downsides of atheism is that there's a tendency that people have to do, and I call it the plain pizza gambit. That if you have a lot of different people who like different toppings, what you frequently find being ordered is plain pizza, because everyone will eat the plain pizza. Maybe it's not everyone's favorite, but they like it. And you can see this sort of thing, incidentally, at a certain point in time in the dissolution of Christendom. You begin to see things like non-denominational Christian churches, which are, roughly speaking, like, okay, there are the various doctrinal points that people do disagree about amongst the various Protestant denominations. So we're just going to get, possibly even, and also Catholics and Orthodox, capital O Orthodox there. So we're going to not focus on any of those. We're going to focus on only the stuff we all have in common. And then you get, a little bit broader was the Unitarian Universalists, who are trying to do that, but let's include the Hindus and the Jews as well. And so we'll be not even Christian, we'll just be generic monotheist. And heck, we can find some similarities with Buddhism and Hinduism. So we'll try to be the thing that, only that stuff that everybody has in common. That sort of thing. And in modern society, what some people think is that everybody has the secular stuff in common. We all believe the same things secularly. We all believe in physics and chemistry and so on. So let's limit our beliefs to just that. And this way I won't be disagreeing with anybody. I won't be agreeing with everyone in everything, but I'll agree with them in at least some stuff. And if we limit ourselves to that, I'm not really going, they might be trying to convince me of something, but I'm not going to really rub up against people because I believe something and they don't. And that's the cheese pizza idea. And that's the idea that atheism is basically just the same thing as being religious, except for the religious parts. It's there's the natural and the supernatural, and so we'll just remove the supernatural and everyone believes in the same natural. And that's not true. It's not true, actually. There are very big, very significant differences between the two. And they range all over the place. It's easiest to see it in its practical effects, things like the belief in inalienable rights and so on. But there are further problems. Atheism has a problem with meaning, that there is no, if there is no God, there is no objective meaning. And there's that. I've addressed this many times. I'm not going to belabor it here. Things like life has the meaning you give it, which is equivalent to saying I'm going to pretend that life has meaning, and that's going to be the same thing. As I said, I've got an entire video about it. I'm not going to belabor it here, but it doesn't work, and there are all sorts of moral implications to this. Because, for example, what is the difference between a live human being and a corpse? They're made up of the same matter, at least a fresh corpse is. So you kill some, let's say, do it in a minimally invasive way where you just prevent them from changing by depriving them of oxygen in a room filled with pure nitrogen. They suffocate to death. They're a corpse. What's the difference between that and a live person? Now, there's a difference of meaning. The one means something that the other doesn't, but it's the same matter. The only difference is what that matter means. And if there is no meaning, if there is no objective meaning, then there cannot be any sort of objective morality. There can only be preferences. I talked about this in like the problems of subjectivism. I've got another video about that. So, for example, there's that. Like, there are real, very significant, very important differences. And it's, like, it has had and continues to have enormous practical implications about a whole wide array of moral issues, and that we disagree about what the nature of a human being is. And so it is valuable to talk about this because it helps people to escape this trap of thinking that there's a common denominator, that we all agree on the cheese pizza. It's only whether you put barbecue chicken or pineapple on it. And so, like, we'll just go with neither barbecue chicken nor pineapple. That's the atheism pizza. And so we all agree on that part. So we'll stick here. And it's not true. It's like the difference between barbecue chicken and a poisoned sandwich. They're not the same thing. They have very little, in fact, in common. And they have massive and extremely important differences. And so it's important to talk about this, to bring this up, to really, call this to people's attention, because there isn't an easy answer. It's not, the point of this is not to say like, oh, look how terrible atheism is, therefore don't be an atheist. Well, maybe the truth is terrible. Like, the mere fact that something is awful doesn't mean it's false. There is, there can be the awful truth. There can be bad news. Maybe, in fact, the world is this meaningless war of all against all. Maybe Nietzsche is entirely correct, that there is no meaning to anything and we are lost in the void, and the best we can do is find some way of pretending. He chose to phrase it in a more optimistic manner, but he was explicit that this was an attempt to phrase it in a more optimistic manner so as to help bring about this, that he was sort of the John the Baptist for the overman who would be able to successfully convince people of this new tablet of good and evil to replace the void left by the death of God. Anyway, in a logical sense, maybe that is true. The fact that it is terrible does not in itself mean that it is false. There are other things that mean that it is false. It is false. But it's not the fact that it is terrible. It's not the fact that down this path lies misery, because, like, maybe we should be miserable. Maybe happiness is a lie, in a, abstract sense. The point is not to harp on the problems of atheism in order to scare people away from it, because that would not be leading people to the truth. And there's a legitimate sense in scaring people away from an error. Like, there's it's kind of practical to teach children not to touch a hot stove because they'll get burned, and not, to explain to them the higher truth of the importance of bodily integrity. But, and the utility of things according to their purpose, and the stove is not meant for your hand, etc., etc. There is a time and a place for, like, let's just simplify and, like, avoid this mistake, because you'll be really unhappy if you don't avoid that mistake. And so there is a time and a place for that. I don't think that's the main way to help people out of atheism. There may be, it's a judgment call. It's a prudential matter whether or not for any given person in any given situation it is to warn people. I think that's especially true of young people. Or where it might be the case would be especially with young people. Young people who don't really see the implications of much of anything, and so showing them the implications so that they at least know to tread carefully as they're, a young person wandering down this path, like, warn them about where the sharp parts are along this path might be helpful to them. Once they're not, like, a teenager anymore, I suspect it's not going to be very useful. That the approach, a far more positive approach, is useful. But if they're making the error of thinking that they're just sort of at this, like, bland lowest common denominator so that they're not having friction with people, telling them that they're wrong about that they have to get off their duff and actually do some thinking. Because there isn't a lowest common denominator. No one agrees well enough for there to be a lowest common denominator. And so you need to actually come to the conclusion of what's true and what's false. And there are people who aren't going to agree with you, and there are people you're going to rub the wrong way, and you're just going to have to deal with that fact, because there's no safe place. There's no fence you can sit on. This fence is not a sittable fence. or at the very least, there's approximately no one there, and there are a lot of people on both sides. So that's really the main thing, and I think that is a genuine useful service to perform. Getting people to think, like, it's a starting point. It is by no means the ending point. It'd be a terrible ending point, but I think it is a useful and important starting point to get people to start thinking, to get people to start realizing the implications of what it is they believe, because the implications of what you believe are part of how, they are part of the way you can know whether or not something is true or false. This is very, very simple modus tollens. P implies Q, not Q, therefore not P. Well, that's the thing that I believe leads to this other conclusion. I'm sorry, P implies Q, not Q, therefore not P. I forget what I said the first time. I might have been thinking of modus ponens, P implies Q, Q therefore P. Modus tollens is P implies Q, not Q, therefore not P. That one. This belief that I hold entails this other belief, but this other belief is clearly false. Well, that actually means my first belief is false. It's not that people go through in that sort of formal logic, but it is that on some level they're aware of this, and this does help them to come to understand it. And so drawing out the implications, even the really bad ones, and by really bad ones we just mean the ones that are obviously false, they're also bad in other ways, but the reason that they're bad is that they're false, within the world as it actually is, not in all possible worlds, in all hypothetical worlds. Anyway, so that's, I think, why it is good to do this, why it is useful. It meets resistance. It should by no means be the only thing that you do. It is a starting point, not an ending point. But it's really good to do because a lot of people will try to hide, and there are no hiding places. And telling them that, in fact, they aren't actually successfully hiding from the trouble is doing them the favor of getting them to at least start thinking about how to address the problem that they're in and coming to a real conclusion on their own. And really addressing it rather than running away from it, because in some societies you can run away from it. In some societies, like in England in the early 1900s, you could avoid the high church, low church issue perfectly well and get along just fine with everybody, and it's not a big deal. In at least some context, not in all contexts. And I'm not saying a person should do this. I'm just saying that basic instinct to run away and hide more or less would be gratified. If followed, it would achieve more or less the end that it was seeking, of not coming into friction with other people around. And there were contexts, there are and have been contexts in which this works for some things, and we're not in one of those anymore. The alternatives that people are actually considering, there's no common ground between them. You can't run and hide. You have to actually stand up like a human being and think. And helping someone to realize that is a worthwhile goal. As I said, it's a starting point, not an ending point, but people have to get started before they can finish. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.